While it's expected for the hero to eventually come out on top in most movies, the horror genre is at least a little bit different. In horror, even if the protagonist makes it to the end in one piece, that's rarely the end of the story, with the final scene often showing the audience that the killer is still around in some form, ready for a sequel should the studio pull the trigger on it. Box office depending, of course. Some movies play this up more overtly than others, but sometimes the villain's survival or even flat-out victory proves sly enough that you might not have even noticed it. So with that in mind, I am Gareth, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movie villains you didn't realize actually won. Number 10, Death, Final Destination 2. Final Destination 2 ends with protagonists Kimberly and Thomas seemingly managing to cheat death for good. Given that the pair haven't reappeared in any sequels, and every other major character in the series has been claimed by death in the end, they're effectively the series' 2 only survivors. Except, well, not quite. The DVD release of Final Destination 3 includes a Choose Your Fate feature, allowing audiences to watch alternate branching paths of various scenes from the film. This includes a different ending in which a newspaper cutting is briefly visible, which reveals that Kimberly and Thomas were killed in a freak wood chipper accident. These things happen, and even if you do dismiss this as non-canon, it's worth noting that, according to franchise creator Craig Perry, the intent was always to have Death beat the duo eventually. In fact, the original plan was to have Kimberly and Thomas show up in Final Destination 3's final train crash sequence. Yet, due to scheduling conflicts, it never really happened. But given that neither has been heard from since the second movie, and Final Destination 5 did everything it could to give Death a decisive victory over everyone, it's clear that the duo are not still among the living. What's your favorite horror death of all time, people? You let me know in the comment section down below. Number 9, Jason Voorhees, Freddy vs. Jason. In the vein of most versus movies, Freddy vs. Jason predictably doesn't offer up a concrete winner. For though Jason Voorhees wins the titular fight, Freddy Krueger is still shown to be alive in the closing scene. The more salient point perhaps is that human protagonists Laurie and Will both survive the movie, earning the distinction of prevailing over both horror icons. Huzzah! But for fans who dare to read the comic series Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, it reveals that Laurie and Will weren't entirely free and clear of Jason's trusty machete. In the comic, Laurie and Will go to Crystal Lake in an attempt to put their trauma to bed once and for all. Yet Will predictably ends up torn in half by Jason, while Laurie catches a machete to the skull, ensuring that their victory was in fact rather short-lived. Even accepting that the comic isn't necessarily canon, Freddy vs. Jason was enough of a narrative dead end that it absolutely made sense to tie everything up by killing the 2 survivors off. Number 8, Kuno Mamia, Cure. One of the most criminally underseen horror films of all time, Kiyoshi Kurosawa's literally mesmerizing Cure follows Tokyo detective Kenichi Takabe while he investigates a slew of savage murders around the city. These killings are made all the more bewildering as the assailants confess quickly while stating no clear motive. We eventually find out that the man responsible is Kuno Mamia, who has used his study of hypnosis to plant suggestions in the killers' minds, compelling them to commit the murders. In the finale, Mamia flees custody, after which Takabe hunts him down and shoots him in a tense confrontation. Though that might seem like a pretty cut-and-dried victory for the hero, as Mamia dies, he draws an X in the air, which has been a recurring symbol found on his victims throughout the story. Cure's final scene then shows Takabe dining at a restaurant, and after a waitress serves him, she can be seen holding a knife in a disconcerting manner. The film ends without showing what happens next, but it clearly implies that Mamia has hypnotized Takabe into unconsciously carrying on his work. Mamia may be dead at film's end, but his brutal legacy lives on, the seeds of his work now manipulating the actions of our triumphant hero. Number 7, Satan, Jennifer's Body. Though we don't ever actually physically see Satan in underrated horror comedy Jennifer's Body, the old guy downstairs is nevertheless behind all the macabre goings-on. After all, Jennifer only becomes demonically possessed after a local band, Low Shoulder, offers her to Satan as a virgin sacrifice in exchange for fame and fortune. The only snag? Jennifer isn't a virgin, so while the sacrifice still works, She gets to stick around as a permanently possessed succubus. At film's end, Jennifer's best friend Needy kills her, in turn destroying the demon. In the final scene though, Needy, who now manifests her own demonic abilities after being bitten by Jennifer, avenges her by hunting down Lo's shoulder in their hotel room and slaughtering them. Though the film plays this as something of a darkly comedic win for Needy, it's important not to lose sight of what really went down here. Namely, Satan got his intended sacrifice, all while Needy is left on the run from the authorities with the entire world believing she is a murderer, and zero possibility of her ever being able to prove otherwise. Number 6, Dr. Anton Fibes, the abominable Dr. Fibes. A big old deep cut now, with 1971's Vincent Price starring horror comedy The Abominable Dr. Fibes. The film revolves around Dr. Anton Fibes, a bereaved man who seeks revenge on the medical team he blames for causing his wife's death during surgery. Fibes subsequently sets out to kill every medic he believes to be responsible, and for good measure the kills are modelled after the 10 plagues of Egypt, because why the hell not? By film's end, Fibes has murdered all of his intended targets save for the head of the medical team, Dr. Phasaelus, who, though surviving to the end of the movie, has been left thoroughly traumatized. By seeing so many of his colleagues die and almost witnessing Fibes kill his own young son, it's clear that he's going to be totally broken forevermore. As for Fibes, he appears to perish in the final moments, embalming and entombing himself with his late wife, only for sequel Dr. Fibes rises again to have Fibes return from the dead to continue his macabre ways. Thanks for checking out this video today, folks. Hit that subscribe button down below for more frightening what culture stuff in your life. Number 5, Luke Lerner, Better Watch Out. Yuletide-themed horror Better Watch Out ends with sadistic 12-year-old Luke failing in his quest to kill babysitter Ashley. The film's final moments show a grimly wounded Ashley being wheeled into an ambulance as she sticks a defiant middle finger up at him. This seems to imply that Ashley will notify the authorities of Luke's guilt and ensure that he's brought to justice. Except the movie's mid-credits scene makes a decidedly bleaker suggestion. In this brief sequence, Luke asks his mother if they can visit Ashley at the hospital to check up on her, making it clear that Luke intends to finish Ashley off before anyone can suspect him. While this scene appeared to set up a sequel, given that it hasn't materialized in the 8 years since Better Watch Out's release, it seems unlikely to ever come to fruition. And so the grim likelihood is that Luke did manage to take a gravely injured Ashley out. And that's that. Number 4, Dr. Ellie Staple, Glass. M. Night Shyamalan's Glass wraps up in deeply polarizing fashion, with all 3 superpowered protagonists, the Horde, Mr. Glass, and David Dunn, all being killed off. The film's categorical hero, Dunn, is drowned in a puddle by a SWAT team member at the behest of Dr. Ellie Staple, who reveals herself to be Glass's true villain, a member of a secret society which has been suppressing the existence of superpowered people for millennia. Yet the final scenes seem to offer something of a posthumous victory for the supers, as it's revealed that Mr. Glass had footage of the fight between the Horde and Dunn live-streamed to the internet. This seems to put the kibosh on Staple's plans to keep the supers under wraps then, except that Shyamalan has a rather optimistic interpretation of how such a video would actually be interpreted by the world at large. Sure, there are many who simply believe everything they see online, but in a so-called post-truth era, where anyone with a smartphone can easily fabricate such a fight, would people en masse really accept that it was real? Would it be easier to believe that superpowered people exist, or that someone cooked up a well-made hoax? In an era where AI is now muddying the waters more than ever, it's simply impossible to believe that such a video would ever have the tectonic global ramifications that Shyamalan's ending readily implies. Number 3, The Bears, Cocaine Bear. Granted, Cocaine Bear walks a fine tonal line where the titular coke-huffing bear isn't so much villainized as presented as an unexpected force of nature. After all, can you really blame the bear for hoovering up a ton of nose powder which was unceremoniously dropped onto its turf? All the same, the bear does threaten the lives of most all the movie's human characters. And while the quote-unquote good ones largely manage to escape in one piece, the ending leaves things hugely up in the air. While in real life the bear quickly died of an overdose, the film diverges from history. The final scene implies that the bears are about to pounce on a tourist trekking through the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest. And on a wider level, this suggests that anyone going for a hike or camp in the area is likely to find themselves killed and devoured by a trio of coke-addicted bears. Lovely. Number 2. Gabriel Malignant. Malignant's utterly loony twist reveals that the movie's shadowy serial killer, Gabriel, is actually protagonist Madison's parasitic twin brother, the vestigial remnants of whom have laid dormant within Madison's own skull. And when Madison's abusive husband pushed her into a wall at the start of the film, this awoke Gabriel, who then embarked on a killing spree while effectively possessing Madison's body, piloting her from the back of her head, explaining why Gabriel's movements are so uncannily jerky. At film's end, Madison manages to take back control of her body and lock Gabriel into a mind prison of sorts, promising that she'll be ready for him if he ever breaks out. It's a seemingly happy ending then, no matter that it completely ignores how, as far as the outside world knows, it was an insane Madison who carried out the several dozen deaths actually caused by Gabriel. It's intensely unlikely, even impossible, that the law will believe Madison's tale, even with medical documentation of her condition. And so it's far more likely that she ends up thrown in a psych ward for life, if not executed for the killings. While Gabriel doesn't accomplish his operating goal of taking permanent control of Madison's body, he's at least ensured that if he's going down, she's sure as hell going down with him. Number 1. Professor Solomon, Urban Legend's Final Cut. Urban Legend's Final Cut concludes with the killer being unmasked as Professor Solomon, who is incapacitated at film's end and finally revealed to be heavily sedated at a mental institution. However, the final moments show him being attended to by a familiar-looking nurse. Why, that's Brenda Bates, the psychotic killer from the first movie, who is apparently still at large and doing her thing. She says to Solomon, "I think we've got a lot in common," before looking knowingly at the camera, seeming to tee up a third film in which Solomon and Bates team up for another round of killing. The third entry, Urban Legend's Bloody Mary, however, ended up being entirely unrelated to the first 2 films, sadly leaving fans to ponder what this dastardly duo actually ended up getting up to. All the same, given how slippery and capable Bates has shown herself to be up to this point, it's pretty fair to assume that she and Solomon had quite the ball.